I remind audiences that we can have a few more questions written in. We've got some already. But before that, I'd like to ask a question myself, following from what's just been said, and that is about what is the optimum way in which you think the wealthier countries should direct aid. I mean, Martin said a bit about aid, but I wonder if any other panelists would like to comment on aid and how it can be appropriately targeted and efficiently spent. Would anyone like? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think going back to what I was saying, I think to invest in quality science education, not just in general education, and Davidson, you spoke about skills, building skills. Also on research capacity, both human and infrastructure. In Africa, and I will speak of Africa because it's the continent I know best, we can get fellowships to come do PhDs in very good laboratories, good universities, but then we are back and we don't have the basic equipment to really do serious research. Yes. And you either move back to where you study or where you have your networks, or you lose that edge. So I would stick on these two, although I know there are many other areas.
So tertiary education and technical education.
I think that the problem is that aid is important, is crucial. It's like we are facing the problem is aid related. You have a headache, and then you take a pill, you solve the problem with your headache. You don't need to take any other pill. But the problem we are facing is a blood pressure problem. And then the headache pill will not solve this problem. It has to be in a continuum. And then the continuum will be, you take a kind of institution like IIASA, how IIASA can clone itself in an African institution for a long-term perspective.
Martin, you want to comment?
I just wanted to add that I did say that the current level of overseas aid is about 50 billion a year. This has been spent over the last 2 or 3 decades, and it hasn't made the transformation. So more of the same is probably not going to do the trick. It needs to be something different.
Yes. I think that relates to a question from the audience, and I should have introduced Anne Gaujean, who's the rapporteur for this session. And so can you read out the question we had?
Yes, there was a question from Dr. Bosnakovic, who is an independent scholar in Switzerland, and he's asking to all speakers on the panel to comment on the role of failing governance, in particular corruption, within the topic area you addressed.
Yes, which clearly relates to the efficiency of aid. So I don't know who would like to start on that. Professor Davidson?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question, but also that is also the problem. The problem is that the moment you talk about Africa, everybody talk about corruption. I haven't been in government for some time. It's not, corruption is much more complex. I think yesterday people talk about complexities. But corruption is far more complex than most of what we think. I haven't been in government myself. The point is, the government or the political will within African governments to solve their problems is very high. But corruption comes in because of lack of institutions, lack of policies, lack of what I would call enforcing mechanisms, lack of systems that would stop corruption. If we look how corruption has been solved, in most cases in this part of the world, it's the credit card. Nobody works with money. And that has been a very useful way of stopping corruption. In our society, the banks are not functioning well. People walk around with money. And they have the ability to corrupt the next one. So even when you try to solve corruption, it has to be solved with institutions and mechanisms that would assist you to do it. And some African governments are faced with problems. We take the oil and gas resources. I said it last week in a meeting in Addis Ababa. You face governments receiving billions of dollars a day by selling crude oil. And they do not have adequate resources to manage it. And so people tend to misuse this money. But as my colleague Yoba said, institutions and institutions that function properly would assist the governance. But if you do not have some of these institutions in place, corruption is a very, very complex phenomenon.
So we need new international institutions. Do you have any comments?
I think that we have also the tendency, this is also the problem, to separate three fundamental issues that cannot be at all separated. This is the development, democracy, and governance. You cannot separate the three. And then you may have one entry point, and then the tendency is that democracy, that means election. Election is not democracy. And then without development, you cannot go anywhere. And that is why the problem of the corruption became imminent when you work in silos.
We've got two questions actually on energy, and perhaps we can have two of them.
Yes,
Yes.
There was one question addressed to Shonali, but maybe others can comment, is how can electricity be provided to those who now lack it and constantly increase it to those who already have it without increasing the emission of greenhouse gases and without the additional potential risk of nuclear power generation?
Okay, so actually this is a question that's already been answered, so it makes my life easier. Professor Dr. Rehahi yesterday already addressed this question very clearly. I mean, of course, electricity demand will increase in areas where you're starting from zero demand today and where incomes are growing and people are moving out of poverty. However, this increased demand does not have to be met by fossil fuels. It can be met by renewables, it can be done in cleaner ways, and this is something that technically we have the solutions for already.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the crucial point is electricity brings growth. Electricity brings about making money. You cannot make money without electricity in the modern society. And for the people who are very poor, or the poorest for the poor, they definitely would remain poor if they do not have electricity. Now, there are several ways of producing electricity, starting from renewables, starting from fossil fuels, starting from clean ways of producing fossil fuels. I think yesterday, when the World Energy Assessment was on, the options they are very wide to produce electricity. So I don't think we should only restrict that electricity cannot be produced by fossil fuel. Nuclear is an option, but nuclear has several problems. And I think the IPCC report that we came out with, the fourth assessment report, went pages discussing these issues. And it is left for us, the clever people, to make sure that we take heed of what's been said in these reports.
What about the very local solar energy, just for individual homes, for charging mobile phones and lighting?
Thank you. I think one important sentence about the solar energy is the Cinderella option. It's that it's romantic, it's nice to talk about it, but it's expensive. For now, it is expensive. And it is always a challenge to produce an expensive energy for a poor man. So it's technically efficient, no doubt about it. But it's not yet market efficient. I think it's on the road of becoming market efficient, but not yet.
That's where we need more technical advance. Yes. We have the other energy question.
I forgot to mention that the question before was asked by Patrick Noak from the Scenario Development in the UK. Now the other question was addressed to Lydia more because it's about UNESCO, and it's from Dr. Sujata Dutta from GISDP in India, and asking how does UNESCO view scope of empowering indigenous technology with mainstream technology and mobilize a science policy to synthesize both for poverty eradication?
Thank you very much. In UNESCO and in my division in particular, we have a team that works with indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, local knowledge, trying precisely to get the innovation that is already happening in society. One of the issues that we are facing is the way we measure today innovation and advance in science. It's really very much driven for formal systems of science and systems of knowledge. We don't have yet good indicators to measure the innovation that is taking place in the informal sectors. And in the case of Africa, of Southeast Asia, these are issues that are really important because a lot of what is happening, it's happening in the informal sector. And the policies, because we can't measure that innovation, these policies rarely promote these good trends in society. So we have been working on that, and we are in fact launching 2 initiatives. One is the STI global assessment, trying to look and contextualize the STI indicators we are using now for policy making, and trying to research new indicators that can indeed try to capture what is really happening in society, not only in the formal system, STI systems. And the second program that is linked to this one is the Global Observatory for STI Policy Instruments. And the idea is really to capture what each country in the different regions in the world are doing in terms of policy instruments for STI development, and create a database and a platform that allows policymakers, researchers, to see and to compare the different countries and the different policy instruments and build new policy environments and frameworks for their countries, their regions, based on good experiences or bad experiences from other places. But it's a very, very important area, and that's why also in research, and Future Earth is also about that, the importance of co-designing and co-producing. It's also about trying to capture the knowledge that exists in societies and try to bring that knowledge back to research and therefore back to decision making. And I think part of the Future Earth debate was also trying to include the communities as important stakeholders, not only as beneficiaries, but also as people that have knowledge about their own environment, their own conditions of life, and their will to change.
Next question crystallizes a point that's come up already. Can we have that one?
Yeah, this is a question from Samir Casey, who is a scholar in the population program at IIASA, and is asking the way forward, whether it might be an idea to establish independent science office in the countries themselves that would be run by the locals and supported by all, and whether institutions like UNESCO, for instance, could support this organization, whether this is an option.
Most countries now have what we call the National Councils for Science, Technology and Innovation. And they are very important. They are usually councils that bring many stakeholders into the table, including the business partners. And clearly UNESCO is working with these councils to support them not only on the regulatory framework, but also in the different mechanisms to promote scientific development, innovation. So this is happening. I would say that if there is a good news about science and technology and innovation for sustainable development, is that most of the countries now have policies and have started building the legislative framework and the organizational framework that we need to implement those policies. What we are short of, it's operational mechanisms, the funding issues, and the constant and sustained capacity building for science, technology, and innovation. This is where we have a huge gap, principally in poor countries, because the people that really have access to good science education are still very few. And this is one of the challenges, and this is why in UNESCO we have a science education initiative, and we are starting to discuss this idea of science for all.
Before asking others to comment on this, I'd like to bring another question which you've had from Professor Sasha Boyko of Chalmers University, Sweden, who says, what role does a scientist play in strengthening institutions in Africa, including research and education institutions? So that's really a footnote to what we had. Would any of the other people like to comment more generally? We're running out of time. Yes, Joanne.
Yeah, I would just like to take this opportunity to make a small pitch for the fact that IIASA is starting a capacity building program with South Africa on extending our Young Scientist Summer Program, which we'll be doing in collaboration with the South Africans. And so I hope we can get interest at UNESCO in that.
Yes. In the last few minutes, other comments on what we as a scientific and academic community can do?
I was about to say something a little bit different, but I'll still, I hope it's still relevant, is that the comment about failed governments earlier was replied as if we were talking about failed states only in the context of the developing world. But there is a failure of government amongst the developed world, which is part of this.
In the United States, indeed.
Well, in Britain, I would actually say also. So the failure isn't on one side, and there is if we can find the leadership, which maybe there were golden days which weren't. Looking, hindsight has its benefits. Where are the people of Kreisky's stature now, or Audenauer, or Menzies of the late 1950s and 60s? I know they're different dates. I don't see them. And I think what is necessary is a different, is people of vision. And deference to my colleague here, I don't have confidence that the UN has the pieces in place to create that leadership. I think it's been slow in coming to the issue. The World Bank has been slow in coming to the issue. And a favorite exam I used to have, question for my students would be, is the World Bank part of the solution or part of the problem?
I think definitely we need new type of institutions, how we approach this complex problem. And then I can understand the climate issue could be addressed by the Minister of Environment here in Austria, but not in Mali, because the development issue is not an environmental issue. And then the problem also is that my colleague Ogun was Minister of Energy in Sierra Leone. He was not dealing with oil and gas, because that was the Minister of Finance. He was not dealing with power sector, that is a utility. And then how can you set an institution that does not have a comprehensive approach of a specific issue? How can we address adequately the issue of energy access without having a comprehensive policy? Just fragmentation and different aspects. But it's very easy to set up new type of institution in the context of developing country than industrialized country, because we have no lock-in systems, institutional systems.
Yes. Professor Davidson, any? Sorry.
Very quickly, I think it's also about making sure that in the national development agenda, these things are seen in an integrated way. This was one of the experiences of my country, where science and technology policies became part of the national development agenda and as building blocks for other public policies in terms of capacity building, knowledge, and really trying to give options for action, because science is power, because you can choose what is best. So I think this is also an important point, to see science policies as really transversal and structural and not just top-down policies.
Thank you. Professor Davidson, any comment? If not, maybe our two framework presenters would like to have a very brief final word.
I think this issue of integrating and finding holistic solutions has been repeated over and over again. And I think one of the ways that are the highlights I illustrated gives you a way to do this is really looking at how even for single interventions, you have multiple benefits across different domains. And this is the way to convince policymakers from different ministries to sit together and find common solutions. So, I mean, I really think that science has a big role to play, and we are showing that we can improve livelihoods in many different dimensions through one intervention. And therefore, policymakers from different ministries and sectors have to come together and do this in an integrated way.
John?
Yes, I very much second that. I think really message that's coming from this panel, and also with the work that we're doing on providing safety nets across the developing world. And I think just to end on putting some more emphasis on that, one thing that I didn't mention is how important safety nets are to growth, and that was mentioned, and the I think if we think about had we kept our debtors' prisons in the UK, how much innovation would we have had? And in many ways, that's the kind of situation farmers are in, that if they take the kind of risks that make them more productive, they also are forced, in many cases, to abandon the safe practices that protect them against starvation would there be an extreme weather event. And so, really untrapping them from that by providing social safety nets is really, I think, one of the chances that we don't talk about so much. I mean, it's very clear that education and it's very clear that technology is important. I really would like to emphasize also the importance of social protection, and coming back, also very much integrated with development across the board.
Yes. Thank you. Just my own final impressions. I think it's clear we can all be techno-optimists in that we do have the basic knowledge that could, in principle, supply food, energy, and quality of life for 9 billion people, in particular for those now in the impoverished areas. But it's the intractable politics and sociology, the gap between potentialities and what actually happens, which makes many of us rather pessimistic. There's a current slogan in English politics, we're all in this together. It has a certain cynicism in England, I'm afraid. But I think we do need to realize we're all on this crowded world together. And so the key question is, can our sympathies become more broadly international? And can our institutions prioritize projects which are long-term by the standards of politics, but a mere instant in the history of our planet? So I'd like, with that thought, to thank all our panelists and speakers and the questioners. Sorry we couldn't take more questions, but thank you all very much.